Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and thank you for tuning in. We're jumping right in again with our next 5 scene studies, focusing on facial expressions. The theme is very fitting, as this was a very emotional week for me. Some pretty exciting things happened, and I cannot wait to share them with you. I'm getting over being sick right now, so I'm really sorry for the crummy audio. The first scene I'm going to be painting is a scene from the Princess Diaries 2. You know, I love classic Disney princesses like Belle and Rapunzel, but my favorite has got to be Amelia, Mignonette, Thermopolis Rinaldi, Princess of Genovia. I loved both of the movies pretty equally growing up. I mean, Anne Hathaway and Julie Andrews. Need I say more? So this scene is the one where Queen Clarice is taking Mia to see her new palace suite, and she reveals the closet. This is, hands down, the most iconic closet I have ever seen, and I think Mia's face says it all. I mean, she literally has a remote control that opens up shelves of shoes and drawers of tiaras. I mean, I know that's not as exciting since we have things like Siri and Alexa now, but I still think it's pretty great. There's a whole seating area in her closet. Now, obviously, this painting isn't showing any of that since we're focusing on characters this week, but I wanted to try to capture as much awe of the scene in her expression. I got an owie about a third of the way through the painting. The life of an artist is not without risks. I get paper cuts pretty frequently. But, you know, sometimes you gotta make some sacrifices for your career. Gotta move on. It's okay. I'm healed now. So for this scene, I focused more on stylizing and simplifying the elements in the scene, such as the tables and the flower vases. I really wanted those kinds of elements to take a back seat. When people view a photo or a painting, their eyes are naturally drawn to people and particularly faces, but you still want to be careful that the set dressing isn't competing with your characters, if the character is what you're wanting the focus of the piece to be. I also tried to stylize the characters and make them a little bit more whimsical and cartoony. This also helps with facial expressions because you can really convey a lot of emotion and really push the expression if you aren't going for true realism. At this point, I was starting to wrap up the painting, adding a bit of colored pencil to smooth things out or bring out some pops of color. I wasn't particularly happy with the queen's face because I went in way too hard on the shadows, but overall, I was ready to be done. And then this happened. I saw a speck of crud on Mia's face, swiped it away, not realizing that I was also swiping through activated paint, saw another speck of crud, swiped again, and proceeded to smudge her whole face. At that point, I was a little fed up with the painting, and I quit filming entirely. Pretty sure I stepped away to get another cup of tea too, so I wouldn't just rip the whole page out. I did end up fixing and finishing the painting, so you'll see the final version at the end of the video. This next painting. This painting really means a lot to me. First of all, I absolutely fell in love with this scene from Onward the very first time I watched it. There's something so captivating about the soft lamplight and the expression on Ian's face, and I think it really speaks volumes even if you don't know the premise of the movie. You can still see this scene and just know that it's a very powerful and emotional scene. So I knew I was going to be doing this scene when I came up with the expressions theme for this week. The sketching process was so enjoyable. I was definitely in a flow state for this one. I really tried to look at the scene and get a sense of the space before making marks on the page. I did a rough sketch, quickly cleaned it up, and at this point I got a little nervous about the colors. Particularly the colors for Ian's face. He has a blue skin tone with hints of pinks in the cheeks, but those warmer tones are much more pronounced in this scene due to the lamplight and the bounce light from the desk. I really had no idea where I was even going to start with painting it, so I decided to do a quick color study in a different sketchbook. I actually did a value study of this piece sometime last year, I think. It was a really quick color study just trying to figure things out, and I think it was the best decision I've ever made. It made the actual painting process so much more enjoyable because I went in with confidence that I knew what colors I needed to mix and how things needed to be blended. Was the color study perfect? No, absolutely not. But it showed me what worked and what didn't, and really informed my decisions going into the actual painting. So I went in with painting the background first, to really block in those big shadow shapes. I used like a medium-sized flat brush to get the paint down quick and not noodle around so much. The second I start going in with smaller brushes, I get really nitpicky. I actually prefer those bigger strokes because I really think you can say a lot more with a lot less, if that makes sense. As you can see, I've been avoiding painting any part of Ian. I finished most of the background and went into the bulletin board on the wall. This wasn't really purpose on my part, just procrastination. Don't get me wrong, I was feeling pretty good from the color study, but my chicken tendencies were not gone. After I played around with the bulletin board for a bit, I went into painting the cassette player. I really love the kind of vintage vibes of parts of this movie. Juxtaposition between the history of the world they're in and modernity is the very big theme of the movie, so I love that they added those kind of vintagey elements. So after working on the cassette player and the elements around it, I finally started in on Ian. I used one of my older brushes that has some fraying to help me stay loose and focus on big shapes rather than small details. I worked light to dark on his hair, and I think it turned out really well. I only went in with a detailing brush toward the end to bring out some brighter blue strands. I really spent a lot of time on the different transitions in Ian's skin. It was a lot of push and pull with the colors. So now for my super crazy exciting news, and part of the reason why this painting means so much to me. I got a DM on Instagram one day from PIXAR saying they'd like to share my painting on their social media accounts. Of course, I was like,
yes.
I'm not gonna lie, I think I almost peed my pants when I saw the message. PIXAR movies have always hit me a little differently as the stories are so genuine, they're always moving forward and developing their artistry, and to be noticed by one of my heroes was just incredible, to say the least. So yeah, I really learned a lot with this piece, and it was definitely a confidence boost in several ways. We live in a very go, go, go world on social media today, and that's really hard for artists. There's this pressure to always be creating and always be posting and delivering kind of eye candy basically for free. It's very much a here today, gone tomorrow situation, so when things like this happen for people like me, it's very inspirational. And it feels like your hard work is really paying off and not going unnoticed. So, onward to the next piece. We have a very iconic scene from the movie Pretty Woman. In last week's video, I combined two scenes from The Wizard of Oz to create the composition I was wanting, and I also ended up doing that for this study as well. I wanted the angle of Vivian's torso and the way her hands were posed with the shopping bags in one frame, but I really wanted to capture her facial expression from the next frame. What works on camera doesn't always work best in a drawing or a painting. The goal of these studies this week is to capture the facial expressions, so I was really having fun tweaking the scenes when needed to best convey those emotions. I went in immediately with the bigger flat brush to lay down those big shadow shapes in wall colors. I know I've said this a lot, but I wanted to simplify the background as much as possible and see if I could convey the scene in the fewest brush strokes. I ended up painting the employee's face before Vivian's. I'm not really sure why, I was probably just procrastinating. The employee is the secondary character of the scene, so it wasn't quite as important for me to convey her expression and likeness, although that was still part of the goal. I was also very nervous about painting Vivian's face because her hat casts a pretty deep shadow over her face. The whole scene is lit with a cooler light from the shop window, so the scene is fairly neutral to begin with. As you'll see, her face turned out very gray. And at first I was so concerned, but then I realized that's how it looks in the reference photo. Could I have warmed up her skin tone? Sure. But I wanted to really work on capturing the likeness in her face, and staying true to the lighting was part of that. Julia Roberts is one of those actresses that most people know what she looks like, so I really needed to observe how the light hits her skin and the nuances in her features to try to convey that likeness. This week's studies definitely showed me just how intricate of a process mixing skin tones is. Color is all relative to the environment, to the lighting, and even to the colors around it. You can make a relatively desaturated red look much more vibrant by adding an even more desaturated green next to it. I really had so much fun with Vivian's hair in this painting. Julia Roberts has these very fluffy red curls in the movie. These subtle character design decisions really do a lot in conveying her character. She has this very vibrant, out there, and confident personality, and I think the voluminous red curls really speak to that. I know I say this about almost all of the paintings, but this next study is from my all-time favorite movie, Dan in Real Life. This movie is truly a masterpiece in a multitude of ways, and it is so underrated. Steve Carell plays this widowed father of 3 girls, and they're going to his parents' house for a big family gathering. He meets this lady, and I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I do recommend you watch it. It is a very, very well done, well acted movie. You forget that you're watching a movie because it's so true to life. Really depicting a family is very hard to do, I think, in movies, and the actors actually spent several weeks before shooting living together in this big cabin to help them actually become a family, and it made the movie really genuine. I come from a very close-knit family, and I love how this movie really portrays what that's like. Also, the music is fantastic. But anyways, let's talk about this particular scene. So this character, her name is Kara, and she's very angsty. She's got this teenage romance that her dad doesn't really approve of, and he's just sent the guy home after he's kind of crashed their family gathering. In a fit of melodramatic rage, she screams,
"You are a murderer of love!"
It's a very comedic scene, but I'm always a bit in awe of how good the actress's performance is. There's so much passion and anger in her expression. I initially started off in my larger square sketchbook that I've been doing the other paintings in, but I ended up switching to a vertical sketchbook instead, also featuring some ancient facial anatomy studies on the opposite page. As I'm focusing on expressions, I really wanted to have the space to convey her emotion as best I could, and the horizontal format just wasn't really working for me. I wanted to still keep her whole torso in frame, but put more of an emphasis on her face. I don't generally draw angry expressions, so it was really interesting learning how the face stretches in a shout and how the eyes and eyebrows squinch together. If you watched the video of the first 5 scene studies, you saw me attempt to work wet on wet for some of the backgrounds, and it never really worked out for me. But I wanted to make another attempt at that technique with this piece, and it worked. I was so excited, and then I realized I wasn't filming it. I missed about half an hour of footage, I think, so that was a really big bummer. Stuff happens and you gotta move on. But I was a little upset, I'm not gonna lie. I don't paint a lot of full outfits, so it was definitely a fun challenge to try to recreate the jeans texture and the folds in the fabric. I especially had fun with her puffy vest. There's some bounce light from her sweater that makes for some really interesting color variations. So in the reference photo, her eyes are mostly in shadow, so the painting looks a bit like there's just brown holes in the eye socket. You don't really see the whites of her eyes at all, which is kind of creepy. But anyways, moving on. So we're ending this series of studies on another Coco scene. I've talked a lot about the realism in PIXAR movies between story and character poses and expressions, lighting scenarios. You get the point. And I think this is one of those scenes that really says a lot about that. Miguel is playing his handmade guitar, and he gets this expression of pure joy and peace as he plays. You can really tell that he's in that artistic flow state where his mind kind of just turns off and his soul takes over. I think about this scene a lot when I'm drawing characters because it conveys that sense of coziness that I really love. One of the other things that fascinates me about this movie is the attention to detail in his guitar playing. They took the time to animate his hands and fingers in the right positions for the chords he's playing. It's things like this that you don't really notice, especially if you're not a musician yourself, but they really do make a huge difference in getting across that sense of realism. Even though this is an animated movie, it feels very raw and real. The sketch did give me a bit of grief, and I had to reposition Miguel quite a few times. I went in pretty quickly into the background with the wet on wet technique again. I feel like I'm actually starting to get the hang of this technique now, but I definitely need to keep practicing. It's helping me create those soft, blended edges and be looser with the painting as a whole. I'm not noodling around with bleeding edges, but rather just letting them flow and correcting as I go. Well, that's a fun little rhyme. In this scene, there's a lot of little beams and junk in the background because he's sitting in a little attic shack thing. It was so much fun playing around with those shapes and pulling them out of the shadows. There's a lot of cooler shadows toward the edges of the piece, but the candles cast a warm glow on the objects near them. Miguel's face was definitely a challenge. The left side of his face has a warmer glow to it, but the right side is getting a bluer light from the TV off screen. I talked early on in the video about how this was a very emotional week for me, and this day in particular was a major contributor to that. I started getting sick on Thursday, but the Friday that I painted this, every hour I felt worse and worse. I ended up going to the doctor about halfway through this painting because I felt like crap. I was also having problems editing that week's YouTube video, so it was a whole thing. But I was really committed to finishing this painting, so I worked fairly late into the evening to get it finished. It also helped take my mind off of how crummy I felt, so I guess that's a win. I wasn't the fondest of how this painting turned out. I think I got a little lazy toward the end of it, but I do think I learned a lot from it. Now that I'm looking at it again, I really don't think it's all that bad. Now that it's been a couple of weeks and I've kind of distanced myself from the painting, I can look at it again and kind of appreciate it a little bit more. Overall, I think this week's studies were very successful and I learned so much about drawing and painting facial expressions. I'm really learning to trust my instincts with these studies and make changes where I think it will help achieve the goal of the painting. So I took a break after this week's studies to work on my schoolism classes and recover from being sick. Your girl's got a weak immune system, and I did not feel like painting for a few days. But we're jumping back into it with the next 5 scene studies, so stay tuned for those. So one more exciting piece of news I wanted to share with you guys. I'm going to be starting a Patreon. I know I've said it 1,000 times, but I really love spreading joy in my illustrations and sharing my art with you guys. We're building such a fun community here together, and I am so grateful for all of you. If you guys are interested in supporting me and helping me make more art, then I'd love it if you'd consider partnering with me on Patreon. I don't have all of the logistics figured out yet, but I know for sure there will be a coloring page tier and possibly some physical reward tiers in the future, like prints and stickers and stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching and for being a part of our little community. Let me know if you have any scene studies you'd like me to paint down in the comments below. Bye guys!